Ancient Greek history often captivates us with stories of city-states, the birth of democracy, epic poetry, and grand theaters. But what about the day-to-day lives of the ancient Greeks? In today's episode, we're diving into the fascinating world of what the Greeks ate, specifically during the Archaic and Classical periods. First, let's set the scene with the climate that influenced their diet. Greece, known for its rugged landscapes and picturesque coastlines, had a climate that varied significantly depending on the region. Most of Greece enjoyed a typical Mediterranean climate. Think long, dry summers and mildly cold, wet winters. However, the farther north you went, or the higher up the mountains you climbed, the climate changed drastically. Northern Greece and its mountainous regions experienced colder, wetter conditions, with frequent rainfall in spring and fall, and snow in the winter. Now, Greece isn't just about its dramatic coastlines. About 75% of the country is mountainous, meaning only around 25% of the land was farmable. Regions like Thessaly, Messenia, and Boeotia had the largest, most fertile plains, offering some of the best agricultural opportunities in ancient Greece. But the islands? That's where things got interesting. Compared to the mainland, the islands typically had a much drier climate, which affected what could grow and, ultimately, what people ate. Let's continue exploring the ancient Greek lifestyle by looking at how geography and natural resources impacted their daily lives. While the Mediterranean climate brought mild winters and hot summers, one thing that made life in the islands tricky was the strong winds. And while we can generalize about the climate, each island in Greece had its own unique microclimate, which made conditions unpredictable from place to place. When it came to water, Greece wasn't exactly overflowing with large lakes. In fact, the only significant lakes were Lake Kopais in Boeotia and Lake Trichonida in Aetolia. Rivers, however, were a bit more common. Thousands of small rivers and streams flowed down from the mountains, but many would dry up or become mere trickles during the hot summer months. Still, there were a few larger rivers that played crucial roles, like the Aliakmonas, Achelos, Pineos, and Alpheos. Cities located along these major rivers used them for both cultivation and drinking water. But for most of Greece, it wasn't the rivers they relied on, it was the annual rainfall. This made farming a risky business, as droughts or heavy rainfalls could make or break a harvest. Too little rain meant famine. Too much could flood crops. The rugged terrain of mainland Greece also meant that land-based trade was difficult, so the sea became the lifeblood of commerce. Most trade took place between nearby regions or between city-states that belonged to the same Greek tribe. But there was always an undercurrent of suspicion. The ancient Greeks often viewed outsiders, or even those from different city-states, with distrust. Now, let's take a look at what daily meals were like for the ancient Greeks. As you might expect, the diet varied depending on where they lived, urban or rural areas, and their social status. However, despite the differences, there were many common elements that united their culinary habits. The Greeks typically had 4 meals a day. The first meal, known as akritisma, was eaten in the morning. While some might have enjoyed a more substantial breakfast, for most Greeks, it was a simple, light affair. Akritisma usually consisted of barley bread dipped in wine, sometimes accompanied by olives or figs. Simple, but enough to start the day. Next up was ariston, taken around noon. Like akritisma, it was a light meal, meant to keep them going through the middle of the day. Then came hesperisma, eaten in the afternoon. Interestingly, this meal was optional. Some Greeks preferred to skip it altogether. If they did eat, it was, once again, a light meal. The final and most important meal of the day was deipnon, eaten in the evening. Deipnon was typically the richest and most satisfying meal, featuring a main dish followed by desserts. This is where they really got to indulge after a day of lighter bites. When it came to sourcing their food, the ancient Greeks would head to the bustling agora, the market located in the city's center. The agora was the heart of the community, teeming with life as farmers, fishermen, and shepherds gathered to sell their goods. As the afternoon wound down and the market began to close, some sellers would walk through the streets, hoping to find a few last-minute buyers for their remaining products. So while their meals may seem simple by today's standards, the ancient Greeks had a practical yet diverse approach to their daily diet, shaped by the world around them. Before wrapping up their day, the ancient Greeks would bring home the products they bought from the bustling agora. Once the food arrived, it was time to start cooking, and this task typically fell to the women of the household, sometimes with the help of female servants. Interestingly, the cooking was usually done outside in the backyard, rather than inside the home. Once the meal was ready, it was served by the household servants. If no servants were present, the women and children took on this role, bringing the food to the table. Meals were often eaten on clay bowls, with the most common beverages being water and wine. But don't worry, we'll dive deeper into what the Greeks drank in a future episode. When it came to eating, the Greeks primarily used their fingers, along with spoons and knives when necessary. Forks, as we know them today, weren't a part of their tableware. They did, however, use large forks as cooking tools. The typical dining setup involved sitting on chairs, although in more rural areas, meals were sometimes enjoyed on the ground, with people sitting on woven rugs. Rectangular tables were the standard, but as time went on, especially after the Hellenistic period, circular tables became more common. Cooking, for the most part, was considered women's work, but over time, some men turned cooking into a profession. These professional cooks would be invited to the homes of wealthy families to prepare meals, and some even wrote cookbooks. These books not only contained recipes, but also provided insights into the dietary customs of different regions. Thanks to these early chefs, we now have much of the knowledge we possess about ancient Greek cuisine. And speaking of food, one staple we can't overlook is the barley cake, a simple yet revered dish that, according to ancient texts, was a joyful gift from Demeter, the Greek goddess of agriculture and harvest. Demeter was honored for her role in providing the sustenance that kept the ancient Greeks fed. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, was often depicted holding grain in her hand, a fitting symbol, as cereals were the cornerstone of ancient Greek agriculture. Wheat and barley were the two primary crops grown in the fertile valleys and plains, but barley took center stage. It was the most common grain used to make bread, the essential food that accompanied nearly every meal. Bread was so important in ancient Greece that it came in countless varieties. The most famous and widely eaten type was maza, a roasted barley bread commonly consumed by the lower classes. It was often flavored with goat's milk, giving it a rich, hearty taste. While barley bread was a bit harder to make than wheat bread, barley was more abundant because it was easier to grow, making it a staple for most people. When it came to making bread, The ancient Greeks got creative. They added ingredients like salt, mint, and fennel to the dough, giving each loaf a unique flavor. Two of the most popular types were Tyrian artos, a wheat bread made with cheese, and dipyros, a twice-baked barley rusk. Leavening was a well-known practice in ancient Greece, so many breads had a light, airy texture. Although most Greeks made their own bread at home, bakeries could be found in many cities, catering to the wealthier classes who preferred to buy their loaves. The most renowned bakers hailed from Attica and Ephesus, and their bread was highly sought after. But grain wasn't the only vital crop in Greece. The olive tree held a sacred place in Greek culture. Olives were a daily dietary staple, accompanying at least one meal a day. The Greeks also used olive oil for a variety of purposes, but its primary use was in food preparation. From frying to seasoning, olive oil was an integral part of the ancient Greek kitchen. The ancient Greeks had an undeniable love for olive oil, and they found ways to incorporate it into nearly everything. It wasn't just drizzled over bread or tossed into salads. It even made its way into some of their desserts. Beyond its culinary uses, olive oil had a multitude of other functions. It was used to fuel lamps for nighttime lighting, making it essential for homes and public spaces alike. In the baths, olive oil served as a moisturizer, and when mixed with perfumes, it became a luxury item for the upper classes. It was even used in medicine and sports, with athletes often covering themselves in olive oil before training or competitions. In sports, the olive tree wasn't just prized for its oil. Victorious athletes were crowned with olive wreaths, symbolizing honor and victory. The wood of the olive tree was also incredibly valuable, used in the construction of homes and boats. It's no surprise that the olive tree held a sacred status in Greek culture, particularly in Athens, where it was a symbol of the city's protector, the goddess Athena. When it came to vegetables, the ancient Greeks had a diverse and rich diet. Fresh vegetables were a staple for those living in rural areas, as well as for the aristocracy. However, for the common folk living in city centers, fresh produce was often a luxury, as they couldn't grow their own, and the prices were high. Instead, they relied more heavily on dried vegetables. The list of vegetables in ancient Greek cuisine is extensive, including onions, garlic, lupins, lettuce, leeks, purple amaranth, cabbage, artichokes, and green peas. A typical Greek salad of the time was a mix of vegetables dressed with olive oil, vinegar, and various spices. But out of all the vegetables, garlic was the star. It was their absolute favorite and found its way into nearly every dish, from bread and salads to main courses. Alongside vegetables, the Greeks also grew a variety of legumes, which were not only a nutritious addition to their diet, but also an essential source of protein. Legumes weren't just a staple food in ancient Greece. They played a vital role in sustaining agriculture as well. These crops had the unique ability to replenish exhausted soil, making them an essential solution to one of the most common farming challenges of the time. Among the various legumes the Greeks cultivated were lentils, chickpeas, beans, peas, and broad beans. One of the most popular dishes, especially among the working class, was fakes, a lentil soup that offered a nutritious and affordable meal. Chickpeas were often roasted, while peas and broad beans were usually mashed before being eaten. Legumes were also frequently turned into soups, a common dish for both city dwellers and rural inhabitants alike. Apart from the cultivated vegetables, the Greeks also foraged for wild plants. These included things like asparagus, sour thistle, and fennel, which added variety to their diet, especially in times when other food sources were scarce. Moving on to dairy, milk, and cheese, were produced throughout nearly all of ancient Greece, but with some interesting regional preferences. Most of the milk consumed came from goats, as cow's milk was a rarity, and sheep's milk wasn't as common either. People in the countryside drank goat's milk frequently, but in the cities, fresh milk was much less common due to how quickly it spoiled. Instead, urban Greeks sometimes used milk to flavor their bread. Another form of milk that was widely consumed was curdled goat's milk, a staple food in many parts of ancient Greece. However, if there was one dairy product that the Greeks adored above all, it was cheese. Made from either goat or sheep's milk, cheese came in both soft and hard varieties. It wasn't just a side dish. Cheese was an essential part of ariston, lunch, typically eaten with vegetables, and it served as a key ingredient in hundreds of dishes. Cheese was also favored by athletes, who believed it helped boost their performance. Thanks to its ease of production and long shelf life, cheese was far more accessible than fresh milk and became a vital part of the Greek diet. So whether it was a simple cheese and vegetable lunch or a hearty legume soup, the Greeks knew how to make the most of what their land provided. In the rural areas of ancient Greece, dairy products were much more prevalent than in urban centers. Interestingly, butter was known to the Greeks, but it was viewed as a barbaric food, with only some northern Greek tribes regularly consuming it. Eggs, however, were a widely accepted part of the diet. The most common eggs came from hens and quails, and while chickens were introduced around the 7th or 6th century BC from the East, they quickly spread across the Greek world. Occasionally, the Greeks also enjoyed pheasant and goose eggs, though these were considered delicacies due to their rarity. Eggs were typically prepared both soft and hard-boiled, and often served as appetizers or even desserts. Additionally, eggs were used as ingredients in a variety of dishes and were sometimes added to bread dough to enhance flavor. Livestock played a central role in ancient Greek life, with goats and sheep being the most prominent animals across the countryside. These animals were perfect for Greece's mountainous terrain, where the soil wasn't suitable for agriculture, but ideal for grazing. Goats and sheep provided not only milk and meat, but also wool, making them invaluable to the ancient Greeks. On the other hand, pigs were more commonly found in cities than other livestock. Since pigs could eat just about anything, they were easy to keep in urban environments, unlike larger animals that required vast grazing lands. Oxen, however, were a prized possession for farmers who could afford them, as they were essential for plowing fields. But raising cattle for milk or meat was a rarity, practiced mostly by the wealthy. Finally, the ancient Greeks also relied on horses and donkeys for transportation and labor. Horses were highly valued for war and sport, while donkeys were more commonly used for everyday tasks, such as carrying loads through the rugged landscape. Horses in ancient Greece were unique among livestock animals because they weren't raised for their meat. Instead, they were essential for racing, travel, hunting, agriculture, and warfare. Owning a horse was a symbol of wealth, as they were expensive to maintain. However, there were some exceptions to this, especially in regions like Thessaly, known for its vast fertile plains. Thessalians were renowned across Greece for their horsemanship, as the region could provide ample food for both people and animals, making horse ownership more accessible. While horses were mostly reserved for the elite, donkeys were far more common in rural areas. Donkeys served primarily as transportation animals, helping farmers carry loads through Greece's rugged landscapes. When it came to meat consumption, The ancient Greeks had a stark divide between rural and urban areas. In the countryside, goat and sheep meat were eaten regularly, and meat in general was much more common. However, in the cities, meat was often expensive and consumed sparingly. The one exception to this rule was pork. Pigs, as we mentioned, were the only livestock that could be kept in a city, so pork became the go-to meat for urban Greeks. Pork was usually eaten with soup or made into sausages, a common food enjoyed by both the rich and the poor. Aside from traditional livestock, the ancient Greeks also raised poultry, including chickens, quails, and geese. As we touched on earlier, chickens were introduced to Greece during the Archaic period and were primarily kept for their eggs, with the meat consumed rarely, usually just the roosters, and only a few times a year. Quails were also raised for their eggs, but their primary purpose was for quail fights, a popular betting sport in ancient Greece. Geese, much like chickens and quails, were also raised for their eggs, but they were kept for other purposes as well. Join us next time as we dive further into the world of ancient Greek cuisine and uncover more about their culinary traditions and rituals. Ancient Greek society had a complex relationship with meat consumption, which was not only tied to everyday sustenance, but also had deep religious and ritualistic significance. Animal sacrifice was a central part of Greek religious ceremonies, held in honor of the gods during festivals or on special occasions. The animals chosen for sacrifice were often the rarest and most valuable, such as bulls and roosters, though more common animals like goats were also sacrificed. These rituals were public events, performed at an altar where the animal was killed, and the meat was then evenly distributed among the participants and spectators. Afterward, the meat was cooked, and a grand feast would take place, creating a communal celebration of food and faith. One of the most famous examples of large-scale sacrifices occurred during the Panathenaic festivals in Athens, or the Hecatomb at Olympia, where up to 100 oxen were sacrificed. However, in everyday ceremonies, a single animal was typically sacrificed, which would still be enough to provide meat for a sizable crowd. Meat consumption, however, varied widely depending on the region. For instance, in Sparta, the men's daily meal was a dish called melas zomos, or black broth. This was a simple soup made from pig's blood, pork, salt, and vinegar, typically served with bread, figs, and olives. The Spartans' frugal diet reflected their military-driven society, where survival and simplicity were prioritized. On the other hand, in Athens, most people only tasted meat during religious sacrifices or festivals, due to the overpopulation and the poor rocky soil of Attica, which made it difficult to raise large herds of livestock. Meat was therefore a luxury reserved for special occasions, and even then, it was often limited. Interestingly, livestock wasn't the only source of meat in ancient Greece. Hunting was a popular activity, especially among the elite and those living in rural areas. Greeks hunted using bows and arrows, traps, or sometimes on horseback for larger game. However, most hunting was done on foot, chasing down smaller animals like deer, wild boar, and hares. In ancient Greece, hunting played a crucial role in supplementing the diet, especially in regions where meat from livestock was scarce. The Greeks were skilled hunters, often relying on the help of hunting dogs to track down game. Occasionally, they would use bait, such as pigeons, to lure their prey. Their primary targets included wild boars, hares, and deer. But they also hunted various types of birds like thrushes, blackbirds, golden orioles, partridges, starlings, and wild ducks. The meat from these wild animals was considered far tastier than that of domesticated livestock, making it a prized and often more expensive commodity in the market. For the Greeks, hunting was not only a practical activity, but also a marker of status and skill, especially among the elite, who valued the flavor and prestige of wild game. Of course, no discussion of ancient Greek food would be complete without mentioning the crucial role of seafood. For a civilization surrounded by water, the sea provided a vital source of sustenance. People from all walks of life, whether rich or poor, consumed fish, although the types of fish varied greatly depending on social class. The common people typically ate small fish like sardines and anchovies, which could be caught in large quantities. These small fish were often enjoyed with barley bread and olives, staples of the Greek diet. Meanwhile, the wealthier citizens indulged in larger, more exotic fish, such as yellowfin tuna, ray, swordfish, sturgeon, sea perch, and the highly prized red mullet. These larger fish were more difficult to catch, making them a luxury for those who could afford them. Fish were sold both fresh and salted, providing a variety of ways for Greeks to enjoy their seafood. A unique part of Greek cuisine was a fermented fish sauce made from sardines, which was added to many different dishes, much like later cultures would use sauces to enhance flavor. Beyond fish, the Greeks also consumed a variety of other seafood. Octopus and squid were popular, as were many kinds of shellfish, including shrimp, crabs, lobsters, sea urchins, clams, and mussels. In addition to saltwater fish, the Greeks also enjoyed freshwater fish like carp, pike, and catfish. One particular delicacy was the eels from Lake Kopais in Boeotia, which were renowned across the Greek world for their exquisite taste. The bustling port of Piraeus served as a major trading hub, supplying the Athenian agora with a wide variety of seafood, from squids brought in from Eritrea to octopi and shellfish from the island of Lesbos, and even salted fish from the Black Sea. The Greeks had access to a rich and diverse array of seafood that played an essential role in their daily diet. Greece was honey, which played an essential role in their desserts and sweet dishes. The Greeks used honey not only as a sweetener, but also as a symbol of fertility and abundance. Honey was often added to cakes, pastries, and fruits. One of the most popular sweets was melitota, a honey cake that was enjoyed during festivals and offered to the gods. Honey also accompanied cheese and nuts, creating simple but flavorful desserts. In addition to its role in food, honey had cultural and religious significance, often linked to rituals and offerings to the gods. The Greeks believed honey to be a divine gift from the gods, particularly associated with Artemis and Demeter, goddesses tied to nature and fertility. The Greeks' love for spices and herbs extended to their medicinal use as well. For example, oregano and cumin were not just flavor enhancers, but also believed to have healing properties, often used in various remedies to treat ailments. The combination of fresh produce, herbs, nuts, and honey gave Greek cuisine a rich, aromatic character that reflected their connection to the land and the importance of natural ingredients in their daily lives. Constant threat to the agricultural stability of ancient Greece. The rugged and mountainous terrain made large-scale farming difficult, forcing many regions to rely on trade to supplement their food supply. City-states such as Athens, with its dense population, struggled to produce enough food locally, leading to a heavy dependence on imports, especially for grains like wheat. The Athenians would often import grain from regions like Egypt Sicily, and the Black Sea to meet their needs. Despite these challenges, the Greeks developed innovative solutions to mitigate food shortages. They practiced crop rotation and used legumes to restore nitrogen to the soil, helping to reduce the impact of erosion and drought. Additionally, colonization became a strategic move to secure fertile lands and ensure a stable food supply. Greek colonies were established in regions with rich agricultural land, such as Sicily and southern Italy, where they could cultivate larger quantities of grains and other essential crops. This final quote from Antiphon brings a reflective conclusion to the video, emphasizing the value of sharing and community over mere wealth or luxury. It serves as a reminder that food, no matter how simple, fulfills its purpose when it nourishes not just the body, but relationships and gratitude as well. In ancient Greece, where regions like Sybaris, Sicily, and Thessaly enjoyed prosperity from their fertile lands, the contrast with more austere societies like Sparta becomes even more pronounced. Despite their wealth, true richness, as the quote suggests, lies in the bonds we form through generosity and the fulfillment of simple needs. Thank you for watching